Καλησπέρα και πάλι. Σας καλωσορίζουμε στο πρώτο πάνελ του συμποσίου της πρωτοβουλίας μας, το οποίο έχει τίτλο «Επιστημολογίες του Νότου, γνωσιοκτονία και κοσμοπολιτική». Είναι ένα πάνελ συζήτηση με τον προσκεκλημένο μας ομιλητή, τον Boaventura de Sousa Santos. And I switch in English now. Hello, everybody. I welcome you to the first panel discussion of our symposium. The title of this panel discussion is Epistemologies of the South, Epistemicide and Cosmopolitics, a discussion with Boaventura de Sousa Santos, who have the pleasure to have with us the dearest Professor of Sociology, Boaventura de Sousa Santos, from the University of Coimbra, for whom we will speak, we will present him to the audience later on for this panel. Please allow me now to present the concept of this panel and the rest of the discussants who are participating to this discussion with Boaventura. So we have with us me, I'm Fotinitsi Biridou from the University of Macedonia, a member of the initiative, and I have with me as a moderator a participant to this platform is Iris Likourioti from the University of Thessaly. With us, we have also the rest of the discussants who prepared their questions for Boaventura de Sousa Santos. We have with us here in situ Penny Travlou from the University of Edinburgh and Emilia Bulvouli from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and the Open University of Greece. And in the Zoom, we have the other two discussants, who are Michalis Bartzidis from Hellenic Open University and Nikos Poulantzas Institute, and Alexandros Koupiolis from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Let me say a few things about the concept of this panel discussion. So we start with a question: if it is possible to think beyond the Western colonial epistemicide that has been imposed on local knowledges and cosmologies through the European colonial technologies. This is the main question we have to raise in this panel. What would it mean to establish new epistemologies and ecologies, for instance, epistemologies and ecologies regarding the Balkan Mediterranean and the post-Ottoman worlds? And through engaged fieldwork and the use of ethnographic methodology, we propose the concept of cosmopolitics as a new analytical category that includes our shared cosmological philosophical concerns about humanism and beyond, local political action and global struggle for justice, rights, and equality. Last spring, we started with two webinars on this issue of epistemologies. One was organized among academics and artists in the Balkan framework in May 2021, and the other was was organized in a Greek context among academics from Greece or academics who are academics and artists who are working outside Greece. So we were looking for in both panels, we were looking within heterogeneous environments and above the colonial divisions of the borders. We had started to look for the ecologies of knowledges in topi, such as I said, the post-Ottoman Balkan crypto-colonial framework or the Aegean archipelago's insular culture. In a will to embroider the topi of examining all this issue in the Mediterranean and post-colonial South political agenda of dissent and heteropolitics. And so we are looking for new possibilities to stop epistemicide and go to the way to cosmopolitics. In this framework, I give the floor to my colleague Iris for an idea.
Hello, from my side as well. There are 4 pictures here that seem to have. Please, can you go back to the PowerPoint? Thanks. Anyway, there were 4 pictures before that we have seen that are extremely important. I will say a couple of things afterwards. We are very much interested on the possibilities to go beyond epistemicide, and epistemicide is the topic that is underlined in this panel. Following the previous path, we think we could both decolonize academia in Greece and stop epistemicide promoted through Western supremacy, liberal humanism of the classics, colonial rhetorics on Orientalism and Balkanism, dispossession and contempt over the others, living at the borders of Europe, etc. New possibilities could open by being creative with local knowledges of material autonomy that we lost after Western modernization, as well as heterogeneous cosmologies of the Ottoman conviviality, we had to forget in order to become modern subjects and citizens. Ecology of knowledges as post-abyssal thinking is having far-reaching theoretical and political consequences. It does more than contribute to the creation of an epistemic revolution and its relevant debates about culture. It's about something that Boaventura de Sousa is mentioning as rearguard knowledges. Following a little bit the 4 pictures we see here in the mountains and in the seas of our areas, we would like to... No, it's okay, don't worry. We relate the idea of epistemicide to the killing of knowledges, and we call it in Greek, let's say, just to get familiar with the term, as γνωσιοκτονία. It means also killing autonomy and jeopardizing the life of people and entire societies. There are 2 worlds that are in a process of epistemicide in the Balkans and the Aegean archipelago at the moment. One is the transhumanist pastoral economy in the whole of the Balkan area, and the second one is the boat making and fishing practices around the whole of Mediterranean and especially in the Aegean archipelago. Epistemologies of the South are a valuable tool for reversing epistemicide. Material sustenance, material autonomy, thus political independence and justice, are based on knowledge. They are based on knowing how to make things. Knowing how to cut trees for boat making in the forests, casting iron tools for carving boats, cultivating and making cotton ropes for insulating them, are only very few of the knowledges in the ecology of boat making. By closing those slides, I would like to say a couple of words about a very dear person to me, Boaventura de Sousa Santos. But what can someone say about Boaventura? Words are too little. Boaventura is a fascinating thinker and a restless doer. He is a committed social scientist and a warm person. I would say that there is something very tactile about him that makes his presence and his theory so close to both realities and social imageries. His influence in both Portuguese and Spanish-speaking world is immense, but it is very difficult to come across him if you come from places such as Greece, where the Anglo-Saxon influence is almost exclusively hegemonic. I came across him and his fascinating work in a very important moment in my life related to the political turmoil that took place during the Greek crisis. It was a moment I was searching for explanations and alternative solutions. That moment I happened to live in Spain and learned Spanish at a mature age. In Madrid, at that moment, our neighborhoods were filled with political action. Theaters, gardens, bookshops, and newspaper offices were hosting assemblies. Those assemblies ended to prepare the electoral victories not only of Manuela Carmena in Madrid and Ada Colau in Barcelona. It was in those days that I came across an interview of Boaventura where he developed his theory, Epistemologies of the South. Then I went to Coimbra to meet him. Boaventura has been a founding member of the World Social Forum, an incredible experiment that we tend to forget today, an experiment we have to come back to. World Social Forum has created the base for an alternative, pluriversal globalization. Apart from being a personal friend of the residents of a Brazilian favela where he spent a lot of time doing his doctoral fieldwork, and where he returns systematically, Boaventura has developed a long-lasting friendship with prominent thinkers and has been an advisor to very important politicians internationally. He has been the founder of SES, the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra, a very important university, let's say the Harvard of the Lusophone world. SES is a meeting point for amazing scholars and activists from all around the world, a progressive institution related to the Portuguese transition to democracy as well. I had the chance to be at the celebratory conference for the 40 years of the SES. That was a real experience. His written work is immense. It consists of a huge body of articles and books, only some of which can be accessed in English. I would say that his work is a good excuse to learn Portuguese and Spanish. You can visit his website to discover a lot, and you can access in English some of the books we have added here on the slide. The titles are very provoking: The Plurivers of Human Rights, Decolonizing the University, Demodiversity Toward Post-Abyssal Democracies, Knowledge is Born in the Struggle, Constructing the Epistemologies of the Global South, The End of the Cognitive Empire, The Coming Age of the Epistemologies of the South, If God Were a Human Rights Activist, Epistemologies of the South, Justice Against Epistemicide. But apart from all this that I have mentioned, Boaventura makes rap poetry and sings rap music. So, please, welcome.
Let's meet with Boaventura. Hello.
Hello.
Very nice to see you.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction, Iris. And I'm so glad to be back in Greece after my first visit to the Polanyi Institute. And now with you having come to our summer school and being with us in Coimbra. So I'm very glad to be back and to be with you. First of all, I would like to congratulate you for this very fantastic mixture of enthusiasm, professionalism, intellectual excitement, and questioning of knowledge and politics that you are doing in your group, Decolonizing Hellas. And I've been looking at your materials, and it's fascinating. I mean, I'm really very not surprised, because I know the quality of the work that has been done in that part of the world. But in any case, I think it's very important to underline the quality on an international scale of what you have been doing. And quite frankly, I participate in hundreds, I would say literally, of meetings on these days by Zoom. And I have never been confronting with such a careful preparation of a symposium. Last week I was at SOAS at the University of London or Cambridge and so on. It is at this level that I'm comparing the quality of the questions that are coming up from your group. And the quality of questions, not so much the quality of the answers that I may give, are really the symbol of the quality and the sign of the quality of the work that you are doing. So I'm very much enchanted, in fact, of joining you and being part of your project at this moment. I have two preliminary notes before engaging in more detail with my topic. The first one is that Iris and Fottini were kind enough to send me a paper about the context, political, economic, social, cultural, in which the archipelago and Greece and the seas are going through after the crisis, particularly after the crisis, the financial crisis of 2008, then went to, of course, to Greece and then to Portugal and Italy and Spain. And I was fascinated because really it looks like I was reading about Portugal. In fact, all the things that the European Union, the factors that were involved in the integration of the European Union were very much similar. There were social structures, economic structures that were being really completely uprooted by the integration, and later on by the second integration, which was the financial integration that took place with so much pain for Greece, for Portugal, for Spain, and even for Italy. So I was reading about myself as I was reading about yourself. And this, in fact, came to my mind that, in fact, we should join forces and do more comparative work on these Mediterranean southern countries of Europe, because we have gone through the same process. And I will highlight, I hope, some of the features, because in 2012, I even published a book on Portuguese. In fact, it's only in Portuguese, I think, and in Spanish also, about the Portuguese crisis. And you would see that I was really being confronted by very much same problems that you are confronted in that text, because my main point there is the internal colonialism going on in Europe, exerted by the northern countries vis-a-vis the southern countries. It's really a colonial relationship. And in fact, a very old one, because it comes, I trace it in a paper, which I'll be very glad to distribute to you, because it's in English and it was published already long ago, in which I really account for this internal colonialism since the 17th century. From the visits of the reports that were written about the Portuguese by the monks that were visiting the monasteries in Southern Europe, within Portugal and Spain particularly, and what they said about us. And it was really colonial prejudice all along. So I think it's very interesting to go back to these histories, because in fact, it was interesting for a country like Portugal, which at the time, particularly still in the 70s, was the early 70s, was still a center of an empire. At the same time, had been in the 18th century an informal colony of England, and it was being now colonized by the neoliberal recipes coming from Europe through the European Union. So I think it's I have been theorizing this conception because I have worked in the past with Immanuel Wallerstein, and I worked with the concept of the semi-periphery, that is to say, countries of intermediate development that are neither developed nor underdeveloped. But I have twisted that concept. I have changed it to account for semi-peripheral countries in the context of Europe, which is very different from the context in Latin America, for instance, in which you have countries like Brazil or like Argentina, which also can be considered semi-peripheral in the subcontinent, but of course they are polities and social formations very different from those in Europe. So I think that this concept was the concept that I was using, and to account for the realities in Portugal. We can discuss probably in the future, not now, because this is not the topic of our today's talk. But in any case, it's very interesting because it is in fact relevant, because in fact the last bout of internal colonialism is so recent, is what we call the Troika interference in Portugal and in Greece, is the Central Bank, European Union, and IMF recipes, and how much devastation they caused on our countries based on recipes that work very well. It may have been working very well for the Northern European countries, but could not be adopted the same way, at least to our countries. And our leadership, political leadership at the time, was not able to present an alternative and fight for an alternative. So I'll send you a paper which it's titled, drawing from Shakespeare, Between Prospero and Caliban. The Prospero, the civilized, Caliban, the barbarian. So I think that our countries have been in this intermediate position of being both Prospero and Caliban. This will allow us probably to see the complexities, the intertwinings of colonialism and, of course, of post-colonialism and anti-colonial struggles in our region. So the second note is the note about the pandemic. We planned for these meetings and for many others meetings before the pandemic. But I just finished, it will come out in English, it's already available in Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian, a book on the pandemic. And the book is called The Future Begins Now, From the Pandemic to Utopia. It is my reading of the pandemic, and I think ever since, following Eric Hobsbawm, that centuries never begin on the first year of January of the first year of the century, but they begin whenever an event inscribes itself in the sociality and the social relations, political relations of that century from then on. I think that the 19th century, at least in the European context, was the 1830 Industrial Revolution. And the 20th century, in fact, began with the First World War and the Russian Revolution, because these two events really marked the century. I think that we had already a financial crisis. We had the 9/11 Twin Towers attack. But I think that this pandemic is going to last, because I don't think that we are going to got rid of this pandemic very soon. I think that we are entering a period of intermittent pandemic, because the model of development that we have now in our societies is bound to produce the recurrence of virus that all of a sudden created this contradictory picture that at a point in which society or Western societies or developed societies are really on the eve of a major affirmation of the human hubris, of the technology potency without precedent of the fourth industrial revolution, with artificial intelligence, robotization, automation, Internet among things, third dimension printing, all these kinds of things. They show the extent to which the human power to transform social reality. At that very same moment, we got the virus and the pandemic, and create a sense of fragility that took us back to the 17th century, to the 16th century, when the colonizers arrived in the New World, the Portuguese, the Spaniards, and later on the British and the French. When they arrived, they brought a virus, smallpox virus, and they were, of course, protected against virus because it has been present in Europe for a long time. But indigenous people were not immune, were not really protected, and they died by millions in Mexico, literally millions of that. So all of a sudden, you saw that even the most developed country like the United States could not protect the life of people. In fact, it was a disaster, a sanitary disaster, and a social disaster, as we know very well. So it creates a double and contradictory image of fragility on one side and potency on the other side. I think that these phenomena are going to inscribe in our century in everything that we are going to do. Having said that, I enter my topic, and I want first to start by saying that when we are really engaging in decolonizing Hellas and decolonizing societies and knowledge, in fact, we are, first of all, trying to settle accounts of our past. We have to understand where are we coming from before we can really figure out where are we heading for? Where are you coming from? And in order to do that, we have to decolonize history. It's almost the first attempt is decolonizing history. And when we do that, the first question is, what is the weight of history? Because depending on the weight, the tasks are different. And it so happens that the weight of history may be very heavy or maybe very light. It is very heavy for some generations, which I call the after generations, the generations that come at the end of something, and they have a sense of the end of something, as, you know, the sunset of something, reality. So in a sense for them, the past is closed. The past is accomplished. If they are dominant people in that history, there is a sense of triumphalism. If there is not, probably there is conformism, very often nostalgia. So they work with concepts like tradition and innovation, continuity and discontinuity, but in any case, the past is closed. But there are other generations, which I call the inaugural generations, the generations that feel that they are at the onset of something, at the beginning of something. And for these generations, the past is not accomplished. The past is a task. The past is a mission. And therefore, their concepts, the light weight of history for them, contrasts with the heavy weight of history for the after generations, because they think that they can transform. Probably all of us have read about such inaugural generations that you had in your country, I had in my country, the world had in different countries. Russians, for instance, that all of us have read about the Russian Revolution and the enthusiasm of that generation that was bringing about socialism under the new paradigm. So it was really a kind of an excitement of something new. And I think after the Second World War, you went through the same period of liberation, which unfortunately was followed by such tragic things. And in Portugal, 1974, the revolution of the carnations, 25 of April of 74, finally democracy after 48 years of dictatorship, much longer than the Greek dictatorship. So for these generations, the weight of history is light. And because there is a task, we have to do something. So in that case, the key concepts are not continuity or discontinuity or tradition or innovation. They are interruption, eruption. We interrupt something, a narrative, an history, and we erupt. Something new is coming in. So I think that we have now to understand which generation are we in or belonging to at this point. Are we after generations or inaugural generations? Well, for the past 40 years, we have been indoctrinated to be an after generation. Neoliberalism, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, have been telling us that there is no alternative. That's the end of history. And therefore, everything is accomplished. We have to go on, but repeating, in a sense, the present. And the future seems to be an endless repetition of the future, of the present. So this is, we have been trained to be an after generation. But the pandemic, in a sense, have changed this. Because we have sense, for instance, we have in the book, I can't go on in this talk, probably in the conversation, I have identified how the pandemic aggravated social inequalities, the kinds of solidarity that I saw in the pandemic. I studied several countries, and I could see that from Istanbul to Sao Paulo to Bogota, how the solidarity was not between the rich and the poor. I didn't see that. But I saw lots of solidarity among the impoverished classes, poor, low middle classes, and people in solidarity with them. I saw a lot of it. And I know that Greece is also a lesson for the world after the solidarity that it was created after the crisis. All these popular clinics and all things that we really read about and had contact with are also very interesting aspects of solidarity. So we were not entrepreneurs of a capitalist kind, but solidarity, human beings in those situations. So in a sense, the pandemic brings us the idea of the alternative. We can see the youth of the world claiming that we are about to end this species. Look at what is going on in Glasgow. On one side, we have Greta Thunberg saying, well, it's about the end of the world, while the politicians in the Glasgow meeting, they want just to continue the same type of movement, even in development model, even though they say fine words, nothing changes. Because in fact, in order not the world to end, it would be necessary to end capitalism. And their business there is to continue capitalism now under a green type of label. So this allows me for a wager, and I'd like to propose you a wager. Are we inaugural or after generations? What is your bet? My bet is that we can be, if you want, inaugural generations. And when I look at your papers and your questions, I see the sense of trying to be inaugural, to interrupt a past, a present, a narrative, so that we can clear the ground for a better future. So the keywords then for us are not triumphalism or nostalgia or conformism. On the contrary, they are rebellion, non-conformity, of course, and the sense of a task to accomplish this interruption and bring about this eruption. So I think that that's where we are. At least I'm going to, in the following, I'm going to say that if we are not inaugural generations, at least we are orphans of inaugural generations. And that changes everything. We are not, I try to bet that we are not after generations. We are rebelling against that. The problem is that whether we can be, in fact, competent rebels, because we have in the past, along the 20th century, I have a sense that we have been very incompetent rebels when we have been rebels, of course. So let's see that how this eruption or this light heavy of history can be working on us, and what kinds of knowledge do we need? Because it's very clear that in order to bring this interruption, the interruption is also ontological, is epistemological. And of course, it's about political economy as well. But it has to be epistemological because the knowledge that brought us here cannot help us to get out of here. Because in fact, it's going really to dig our caves in which we are going to die. I think that's basically what is coming from Glasgow, nothing else. I'm not saying that we are going to, in this interruption, that it is necessary to neglect all the other past and all the knowledges about the other past. It's very important to have in mind that, in fact, societies don't change by just total, absolute changes. There is a palimpsest. things are accumulating, like in geology. And we have to understand what remains, what does not remain, what is discarded, what is reconfigured. In order to do that, I propose to you another experiment. The first one is, are we inaugural generations? The second one is that let's see how many paradigms of knowledge do we have, particularly if you are interested in the social struggles, what kind of paradigms we have had in the past. We have basically two. The first one is knowledge after the struggle. That's Hegelian knowledge, the Hegelian epistemology. The owl of Minerva flies at dusk. That is to say, after the struggles, social struggles, historical struggles, things are calm, and we can start to reflect on. We can do research, we can produce knowledge, because knowledge is separate from the struggle. In struggle, we cannot really produce knowledge. We just struggle. That's the idea of this paradigm. And it is the dominant paradigm, by far the dominant paradigm in our universities. All of us have been teaching according to this paradigm. What is the problem with this paradigm? Is that at the end of the struggle, the only knowledge that still resists and is there is the knowledge of the winners. The knowledge of the losers is gone, disappeared. And therefore, we are bound to teach, to do research on the knowledges of the winners. The history is told by the winners. And that's what we have been doing basically at our universities. So this is by far the dominant paradigm. There is another paradigm. It is the Marxist paradigm, which has had a very important influence and still has. I call myself a decolonized Marxist because that's what I think I am now. But this paradigm is just the opposite. It's knowledge before the struggle. Because what Marx wanted is to produce a Marxist science that would train the working class to become a revolutionary class. Because in sich, in itself, it is not revolutionary. But für sich, für itself, it can be, and it will be, the revolutionary class. But for that, you need an alternative science. The Marxist, the proletarian science. So knowledge before the struggle. Well, this paradigm has been very important for all of us. But it has also caused us some frustration because, in fact, in a sense, both the Hegelian and the Marxist paradigm are separate from struggles. And the people, in fact, in the broad world beyond Europe, because after all, Marx is as German as Hegel. In fact, it was very much influenced by Hegel. The world is today much larger than Europe. When both Hegel and later on Marx wrote, 95% of the world was under the direct influence of Europe as colonies or as zones of influence. And in fact, later on, China, which was not, was submitted through the wars, the Opium Wars, to submit it to the Western order. So today the world is much larger, and it's always been. But in fact, now it's more visible because Europe has shrunk and the world has expanded. And we cannot go on with the theories that were developed when the world was an European world. It is not today. We can see now with the new Cold War between the United States and China. Well, we are a junior partner of the United States. That's where Europe is. It's nothing beyond that. China has an ally, a junior partner, which is Russia, and the United States have another junior partner, which is the European Union. So the world is different now. So that's why I propose a third paradigm. Is paradigm the knowledge is born in struggle. That's the epistemology of the South. Because in fact, the epistemology of the South have always been there. I named them in 2009, but in fact, they have been there all along. They are ancestral, traditional knowledge, popular knowledges, feminist knowledges, indigenous, urban, all the knowledges by which most people in the world carry on their lives. They don't carry, they may have their cell phone, but the everyday life then goes to their own knowledges that they abound. But these knowledges have never been credited. So I think that the knowledge born in struggle create a different epistemological paradigm, which, by the way, will also be ontological one. And very briefly, there's a paradigm brings, because it's always looking from the struggle. And that's very important to concentrate on the struggle, because what we have been doing very much in our knowledge is that the struggles are very easy, or it's not even necessary or possible to struggle because powers are so powerful that we cannot struggle against them. But it is neither of these positions is really the right position from the perspectives of the epistemology of the South, because the people that have been excluded, the precarious bodies, the racialized bodies, the racialized, the endangered territories, the sexualized bodies, the suppressed knowledge, the negated cultures, all of them have resisted. And the fact that they have resisted, they are with us now, claiming their voice. And they have resisted for many, many centuries. So they are very resilient. Even though the term of resilience has been invented, another World Bank invention, as if, in fact, there is something new for some people. Well, those people that do not count have always been very resilient. So the first thing is that for the people that are in struggle, in these struggles, for these bodies and territories, it's very clear that we live in societies that are capitalist, colonialist, and patriarchal. That's where we can see there are many other struggles in the world these days. If you are in India, the caste system is a form of domination. If you are in the Middle East, probably political religion is a form of domination. But the main dominations for 4 or 5 centuries now have been these three. And what is amazing to me is that once you look from the struggle, they are always integrated and articulated. There is no capitalism without colonialism. There is no colonialism without patriarchy, and none of them operates without the other. They change in different countries, combined and uneven, as Trotsky would say, but they are always there and they are articulated. I was recently analyzing the economic political crisis in Brazil. As capitalism became more aggressive, immediately the genocide of the Black youth in the cities rose again. That is to say, colonialism under the form of racism became stronger. And the feminicide and gender violence also increased. I document in this book, The Future Begins Now, that in all countries, the pandemic, by really making the conditions of capitalist domination more drastic for most people, it led to the increase of colonialism under different forms, particularly racism and to patriarchy. And in the Mediterranean Sea, we can see how the immigrants have been dealt with. It's a problem that many of you are very concerned, as we are in this part of the world. So I think the first thing is that see that these dominations are articulated. And that's why you have to decolonize our Marxism. Because in fact, even though now we know that after the first volume of Capital, Marx wrote 30,000 pages, unpublished pages, that we are now coming to know. Some of them are available in German, others already in English, other languages. And you can say that what he's doing in that period is criticizing many of the tenets of the theory that is in the first volume. In 1881, 2 years before he died, he wrote a paper in which he said that my theory in Das Kapital applies exclusively to Europe, does not apply to other countries. So you can see how un-Marxist this is. And in fact, this paper was not published by the Marxists, to which it was the famous letter to Vera Sasolic, but Iskra didn't publish it. Plekhanov didn't allow, even Vera didn't allow it to be published. They thought that Marx was senile. And the article was published only in 1924 or 29. You can read that in Theodor Shanin, The Late Marxism. So I think that all this is telling us that this intertwining of dominations is very important. And all is there. And the drama of our time is that while domination operates articulated, resistance has been fragmented. How many anti-capitalist trade unions and parties have been racist and sexist? How many feminist movements have been racist and pro-capitalist? How many anti-colonial movements have been sexist and pro-capitalist? As long as domination operates articulated and resistance is fragmented, we don't live this inferno, this hell of domination. So the epistemology of the South has a sense for making this visible by making visible the invisible. What is the invisible? As the key concept of the Bissaline is the idea that under these conditions of modern society, capitalist, colonialist, and patriarchal, there is no possibility for humanity without subhumanity. There are always racialized and sexualized bodies that are degraded ontologically so that they can be further exploited. And I can't give you a Marxist reading for this. Is that free labor, as propounded by Marxism, cannot sustain itself without highly developed labor or non-paid labor. Who is producing this labor? Racialized bodies, slaves in the beginning, and women, non-paid labor. So that we, even Marxists, we accepted this concept, a very strange concept, that calling the type of work that women do as reproductive. This is highly productive work. Taking care of children, of men, cooking food, preparing the house, sewing, doing all kinds of things, highly productive. But we have been accepting that this is reproductive. And if it is reproductive, it's not included in the exploitation. But that's the other reading that I think that I'm proposing to you. If you look at this then, what are the epistemologies of the South? It's basically an attempt to validate, identify, validate the knowledges produced by racialized and sexualized bodies, by those that have been made invisible. And that's why the concept of sociology of absences is so important. Of course, it's not a sociology in the positivist sense, because in positivist sense, how can I do a sociology of something that does not exist, an absence? It's a different thing. And as you know, I draw from Ernst Bloch the idea of the noch nicht, the idea of not yet, the emergence, that the emergence exists because there is before an absence. So we need a radical diagnostics of our time to bring about sociology of absences. And for me, it's very important that at this stage, we look at our civilization, as is usually said by dominant knowledge, and identify the barbarian side of it. That is to say, our civilization is also a barbarism. The concentration of wealth is barbarism. The fact that 20,000 people have drowned in the Mediterranean Sea and nothing happened is barbarism. The regular wars are barbarism. The ecological catastrophe is really a barbarism. Because if these people that drowned in the Mediterranean were US citizens or Dutch citizens or German citizens, it would be a major crisis, 20,000 people. But they are subhumans. They are immigrants, they are Africans, they are Bangladeshis. They are people ontologically downgraded. degraded. So I think that if you look at this, then you can see that the richness of experience that is wasted by this kind of knowledge that produces 5 monocultures. I can't go into that, but it's very important for you in the decolonizing eras to see how these 5 dimensions of the monocultures of knowledge, the monocultures of classifications with hierarchy, men and women, nature, society, profane, or lay, secular, and the sacred. All these binaries, they hide hierarchies that are naturalized. The monoculture of the linear time, a very exceptional conception of time, because most people don't go by linear time. The conception of the dominant scale, the idea that the global and the universal is always superior to the local and the particular. And the monoculture of capitalist productivity, that you have to analyze productivity of people, of land, in a single cycle of production. While we live in multi-cycles, while land lives in multi-cycles. But we don't allow it. That's why we have to put lots of herbicides, insecticides on the land so that it's productive in that cycle. What happens after, we don't care. So this monoculture is very important for us to understand our task. Our task is to replace epistemologically, ontologically, politically, analytically, monocultures by ecologies. For each monoculture, we have to entertain a conversation on the possibilities of ecologies. Ecologies of knowledge, ecologies of scales, ecologies of differences without hierarchies, ecologies of temporalities, ecologies of productivities. And ecologies in this sense is the extent to which different systems can coexist, cooperate, and be mutually enriched by the type of cooperation. That's why in the epistemology of the South, there is no anti-science instinct or feeling. I'm a social scientist, how could I? What we say is that science is, of course, modern science is a valid knowledge, but it is not the only valid knowledge. There are other valid knowledge. And as I always say, if I want to go to the moon, I need science. If I want to know the biodiversity of Amazonia, I need the indigenous knowledge. So I think that we have to entertain this discussion because we have to understand that at the base of each of the monocultures, and we do that all the time at our universities, there are 2 procedures, hidden procedures. This is coming out in a book that I'm writing, I hope to accomplish that until next year, in which I try to see the 2 main procedures. One is called purification, and the other is the scaling. What we do basically in our knowledge, in our life, in our economy, is purify, that is to say, to create homogeneous units that you can scale them up without changing the model. The model is always the same, but can be scaled up. So we purify knowledges, as we purify production, as we purify races, as we purify productivities, as we purify scales. That is to say, everything that is not pure is messy because this changes the possibility of scaling. It creates the need for different models. And this monocultures is a single model thing. It's an iron cage of a single model, capitalist, colonialist, and patriarchal. So I think that if you want to break with that, it has to go through these procedures of epistemologies that go for the ecologies. So I think that if we do this, then we have a task, and I'm about to end, and to tell you that we, and we can go into the questions because are immense and fabulous questions, what we have to do at the university. And I want to address you this final note. First of all, the epistemology of the South exists so that they won't be necessary in the future. They want to disappear. there are epistemologies of the South as such, because there are epistemologies of the North. Because there is a North and South, and a kind of oppressed, unequal distribution of power in our world. And so, if we have this humbled, so we don't, it would be nice, it's almost like the withering away of the state, the withering away of the epistemologies of the South. But it won't be easy, because we are not at a period of decolonizing, even though we do our work, and so enthusiastically as you do. We have to understand that we are a countercurrent, and even more so today, because we are in a period of active recolonizing of our institutions. And since this recolonizing always operates through patriarchy and capitalism, read this recolonizing when, for instance, your university is concerned about rankings. It's concerned when how much output production you do. In English journals belong to 5 companies that account for the global production that we have to produce in a non-native language, according to criteria that you are not, even though you are responsible for the people in your community across the street, but you are writing far away for some other people. So I think that we have here a very difficult task. But I think that if we really do this, we'll see, and that's my final note, the epistemology of the South is replacing knowledge about by knowledge with. If that's so, then they cannot be accomplished solely at the university. Fighting at the university level is important, but we have to be in the struggle. We have to be with the struggle, in solidarity with struggle in different ways, of course, different in different continents. So the epistemology of the South will never be, or should never be, a discipline in our universities, because what they want to change is the way in which the knowledge that we produce is a different knowledge, a different teaching, and of course, different educators. And we have to educate ourselves, which is probably a very difficult task, but that's where we are now. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Boa. We are very glad to have you with us and to give us all this feedback about your knowledge you collected from your fieldworks around the world, watching the struggles and bringing this kind of knowledge to our attention here. So let's pass to the couple of questions we prepared for you. And we sent it already because our discussants prepared this question for you. The first set of questions is one is about culture as race, and the other one is about the concept of hybridity between modernity and global South. So let me pay a little bit, let me focus on my question about culture, is because usually in the liberal discourse and the discourse connected to the human rights discourse and all this debate, we have the use of culture as a continuity from the concept of race. So do you think that how we can figurate knowledge and epistemologies and ecologies beyond culture and its abyssal dividing and non-inclusive rationality? This is my question, my first question, and I don't know if we'll have with us Alexandros Koupiolis to... so I give the floor to Alexandros.
Να ρωτήσω.
Ναι.
Can you hear me first?
Yes.
Can you hear? Okay. So I will just formulate my question that I have already submitted.
Ναι, την πρώτη.
Okay. So my question would be that in most colonized or crypto-colonial countries, such as Greece, according to some anthropologists, there is a strong and inextricable mixture and hybridity of epistemologies, ontologies, and politics of the colonized and the crypto-colonized countries, with the colonizers, the countries of the center of the north. And it's a condition of influence, imitation, resentment, and opposition to Western modernity that has deeply informed local cultures and histories. If this is the case, if we have this kind of hybridity and mixture, inextricable mixture, then which particular logics, epistemologies, practices, and politics of critique and new creation could enable such colonized or crypto-colonized localities, societies of the global south to build their own paths in the contemporary world beyond the state of the covertly or clearly colonized countries and societies by Western capitalist modernity?
Alexandro, yes, I read your question, and it was the first question that came to me. So I printed them, and I printed the document. I put together all the questions, and my colleague, if you allow me, but I have by the order, and in fact coincides. So Alexandros, you know, there is no pristine epistemological options in our world after 5 centuries of such, 5 centuries in this world which we are more familiar with, because Eurasian contacts were for millions, thousands of years, very important. I mean, after the reading of history by Jack Goody many others, we can see how the Eurasian region was so rich before this modern period, as we call them. So there were so many contacts that, in a sense, everything is hybrid, so to say. Hybridity is constitutive. When I look, for instance, at the Mediterranean region, which is probably one of the richest regions for contacts, because you can see for this Eurasian type of Portugal was very far away periphery. The Mediterranean was absolutely central for this connection, East-West connections. When I look at that, what I see is that the Mediterranean, it would be very interesting to compare the Mediterranean with the Caribbean. The Caribbean is the other region in which, that's the only region, in which the decolonial thinking has accepted the concept of hybridization, of creolization, as it is called, creolity. Because when we read Glissant, when we read Sarbi, we read all these people that have been working in the Caribbean, you can see how, for them, the encounter of cultures is so complex, East and West, Chinese, Japanese, and so on, that in fact there is no original type of culture to which they can report, which is different from Latin America, in which indigenous people still claim being the original and originary people there, even though they come through Siberia from other parts and ultimately from Africa. And they displace eventually other people that were there. So I think that we have to, if you really start from the concept of the struggle, it is clear that all the struggles, when they are initiated, who determines the terms of the struggle? Any struggle. Is the dominant powers in reality or in epistemology? What is the struggle? Is the way in which you can change the terms of the rules of the game. So what we are doing here is an attempt to change the rules of the game. What is the valid knowledge? What can we discuss? And our colleague already raised the questions of culture. Is culture that separate type of reality that is not connected to the political economy? Or on the contrary, is really part of the political economy, as it is today for the cultural industry of the entertainment. But we, in our concepts, lag behind all these things that are happening in that area, and dominant knowledge still conceives of culture as something completely different, and particularly when the distinction between culture and civilization was also advanced. So I think that, Alexandros, our South is not a geographical South, it's an epistemic South. Because in fact today, I teach, now I've been teaching a lot in England, for 35 years I taught in the United States as well. But when I go around for Latin America, Africa, and Asia, the northern epistemologies, even the most positivistic type of conception, which does not even integrate quantum physics and the principles of uncertainty of Heisenberg or the Bohr, for instance, that now we include in any kind of epistemology about modern science, are not present. That is to say, they are even more northern than the northern epistemologies. We, in the Catholic world, we say that they are more papist than the Pope, popish than the Pope, because they are really more conservative in a sense, I would say. So I don't think that it is with the geographical south, because I identify epistemic south in the north, and of course, the epistemic south in the south, geographical south. But they are different, because I can see that Europe, there is an epistemic south. Our immigrants, our generations of immigrants, sometimes second generation, third generation, they have been here in Europe. And still there is resistance to call them Europeans because of the color of skin, because of something, because of different cultures. When we know that, you know, the European culture, what that is. I mean, it's a nice idea, as Gandhi one day said, like democracy, European democracy, it's a good idea. Why would it be a good idea? Can we forget that Metternich said in the 18th century that Asia began at Landstrasse. Landstrasse was a street in Vienna where all the immigrants from the Balkans lived. And because they were Muslims, they thought that it was Asia. It was not Europe anymore. So the Ottoman Empire was treated like the same way. So I think that we have to understand that we have to go through hybridity. That's a being. Why? Because it's not eclecticism. Relativity is not relativism. And hybridity is not this eclecticism that destroys everything, missiness, because we have to understand the relations of power underlying hybridity. Because what is mestizaje? You know, the word mestizo thing is basically the violation of a black woman or an indigenous woman by a white man. That was the original of the mestizo in Latin America. You know, and as long as human species are concerned, but you think about knowledge. So there is hybridity, that is a colonizer hybridity, and there is a decolonizing hybridity. You know, the kind of analogy that I'm proposing to you is the distinction between, in Latin America, they call the white mestizos, were the mestizos that identified with the colonizer. Okay. And the black mestizos or indigenous mestizos are those that identified with indigenous and in fact struggle with them, side by side with them. So I think that we have to understand that nothing is pure.
Okay,
but we have that.
Let me, sorry to interrupt you, but we have to run a little bit and to go further to the rest of the questions, because I'm afraid so you will have the opportunity to answer all of them, I think, and to give answer to all of us. The next pair of questions about dignity related to culture that I'm waiting for an answer on this, and the dignity as a local civic virtue. It's a question raised by me and Michalis Bartzidis. And another question is that of Emilia related to orthopedic thinking. Okay, Emilia, go with your question, and
well, I you know, since I got the questions in writing, I'd sign. So, colleague, you are Fortini, right?
Yes, Fortini.
And you are talking about the questions you did with Michalis. Yes, yes. I have identified it very, very well. So, I think the question also came about dignity. Let's start with that. Well, I think that you, Fortini, you probably know why I came across so intensively with the concept of dignity, because when we were, and I think I told you the story, I told some people the story that when we were organizing the World Social Forum in Tunis in 2013, It was the Arab revolutions, Fortini also, because you wrote the book on the Arab revolutions. So the idea that everything would be on human rights. And our African friends said, well, no, in North Africa, we don't want this name for the World Social Forum. And for good reasons, because human rights were brought to North Africa by Napoleon in 1798, when he arrived in Alexandria and said, you know, they say that we are invading you. We are not invading you. We are bringing you the human rights. Well, human rights is a genealogy of invasion. So it was not apt. Then we went on for discussions, a kind of an intercultural discussion for hours. And we came across the idea that, in fact, in Quran, there are several times in which the word dignity appears. And the indigenous people also use the concept of dignity. And we came up to the conclusion that human rights is a dignity narrative, like any other. So dignity would be the name, not human rights. Would be a name that would allow us to encompass the struggles for a better society by dignifying subjects, cultures, and territories, and people and populations. So dignity is as at this point, this kind of intercultural type of genealogy that we like. But I would add something to your concept as you put it forward. And the concept I would add is respect. I don't think that we can really restrict to dignity. Dignity is almost a kind of an ontological condition, but we have to have a kind of a more active concept. How you really bring about dignity. You bring it about by respecting others. And I get this from the indigenous people. In fact, the two concepts. Once I was in a kind of intercultural discussion on socialism, liberation, and etc. And we came across and to the conclusion that probably the two words for them were not socialism or communism or whatever. They were, as they told us, they are white man's trap. But we were in agreement on these two concepts, dignity and respect. So I think that we should, particularly for the left, there is a question here by Iris, or Iris on the left, is that we have to be more intercultural about these concepts. So dignity and respect are two key concepts which I would go along with. So these are the questions. For Tini, your question, which was one of the first questions to come. There was also another question by Iris before, but I don't know if you want me about the left, because Portugal now is going through elections because our leftist government is gone, was defeated by the budget, so we have a problem here, but I don't go into that now. And so the question is that what we mean by nature, Fortini, is by culture. I mean, we come from a paradigm in which culture is opposed to nature. Suppose that nature is part of our culture. The proposal that I'm making these days in the paradigm, in this work I'm doing, and I'm glad to share it with you, is that nature does not belong to us. We belong to nature. If we belong to nature, there is no culture without nature. So there is no culture without political economy, with life and sociability. So culture has to be completely refounded on these ideas, because in fact, if we do that, it also entails an ontology. And that's our ontology is also incapable of helping us in this epistemological and cultural transformation. Because I think that you have to move from an individualist type of ontology to a relationist. And I get that from Ubuntu, from Africa, and we should get from them. I am because you are. I could not answer your questions if you didn't make the questions, ask the questions. So my response is as much yours as my own, because you ask the question, you direct my attention to a specific problem. If we do that in ontological terms, and I've gone through all the African philosophy very intensively to see what are the conceptions of ontology, why the I of Descartes the ego, I am because I think because I am. No, it does not exist, that word, the I does not, because it's always, I'm here, I'm from, I'm with my family, my clan, my territory. So we have really to revisit all these ontologies, not because you want to be Africans or indigenous people, it's not that. It's that their ontology is a contribution to the epistemologies of the South that are useful for the world in itself, not just for them. It's really a mistake to consider that is just for them. Emilia, I don't know if it is with someone also in these questions, I don't know, I think it was Fortini or Michalis, that quoted a good friend of mine, Veronica Gago from Argentina, Lucy Caballero. Of course, I'm very familiar with her work, and I know about the neoliberalism from below. We have done the research in that respect. That's why we don't have, Michalis, everyone that is involved in the struggles cannot have a romantic view of the struggles, never. I have seen many indigenous leaders corrupt, selling to nature products, like one of these cosmetic companies, selling land for a Mercedes Benz car that they cannot use because they are in the forest. I have seen all these kinds of things, but I don't become pessimist because of that, because why should the indigenous be pure and corruption is a privilege of the white man? No, it's not a privilege. In fact, they are much less corrupt than we are. So, but you cannot have a romantic view of that. Emilia, about the orthopedic concept, thank you so much for that question, because I think I answered it, but that allows me to is precisely the orthopedic thinking is the result of purification and scaling. Because the orthopedic, this reduction type of thinking, has to purify the piece before it can apply it. And that's why purification and scaling, they are the two really forms of life. And in fact, you point to new things like the peer-to-peer type of relationality. That's the new frontier, my dear. I think that we have to go through lots of reflection on what, for instance, is going on now in Lisbon, because in Lisbon now the Web Summit is meeting. And believe me, it's really something serious what they are discussing in terms of decentralized ways, but in which at the same time, Facebook is being defaced. It's very interesting. The Facebook is being defaced because they are really promoting the disaster of democracy in which we are by promoting hate speech, extreme right positions. Unfortunately, only the insiders can do this kind of struggle, the whistleblowers. So I think these were the questions, Wadin. I don't know if there are more, but I know I have a long text that you wrote together with Iris, which is a very good, that's the one that I really appreciate a lot by comparing Portugal with Greece. And at the end of that piece, you also asked some questions, and there is a final one there. I don't know if you want to go, because you raised Iris and Fortini, lots of questions there. Some I will just, if you have, I don't know if I have time to go into it, because I'd like to answer the questions of methodology, because also my students today, as you can imagine, is the key question. I mean, if you really adopt epistemology of the South, what are the methodologies to do a PhD, for instance? Well, this creates lots of problems, and I would like to address that if you think I have time for that. If not, I won't.
Thank you for your intention. But I think we can pass to the next couple of questions and connect a question with Boaventura raised by Penny Travlou, for instance, and the other question raised by Michalis. I don't know if we have him with us.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
And I had to. I had to add something on the question on dignity and articulate it with my question on humanness, etc.
Okay. Do that. Brief. Be brief, please. Short.
I have the. So, yes, I think that my question on articulating knowledges, dominant knowledges, and new epistemologies, or the other knowledges, my dear Prof. Boaventura, I think that you gave us today an answer in your lecture on this mode of articulation between resistances, articulation through the struggles, if I understood well your new proposition. And I think that our conception of dignity in this question with Fotinitz periodo, we received dignity as a result of struggles. After Puerto del Sol, indignados, after Syntagma Square, aganactismeni, after struggles and resistances in Tahrir Square with Al-Karama. And of course, all the previous struggles and resistances in Latin America, in in Chiapas, etc., on the label on dignity. And I think this is it's a easy and great paradigm. What we mean that we have an idea to articulate the previous dominance or Western knowledges with the new knowledges or knowledges that have lost, etc. This is a paradigm dignity because we can to follow your proposition for a new articulation, and this is the last question from me, my personal question, between the last January that we have discussed in the Nikos Pouliadis Institute Left Theory Congress on your proposition of new thesis 11, if I remember well, your question on abyssal line, and of course all this that I believe the Western thought on that the other is not simply the different, but asymmetrical from Cartesian to the other. And I think there will have a very, very interesting discussion between your notion abyssal line or this asymmetrical understanding of difference in all this Western philosophy and thought. This is let me to formulate finally my question. Having initiated the discussion around this issue, how do you think we can become more specific about this process of articulating former heterogeneous knowledges and integrating it into a new unit of difference? You gave some answer today. And second, what we maintain optimism about this synthesis, or should we move along a line of constant demarcation between Western knowledge and the knowledge of the subaltern peoples, population, and communities? Thank you.
Thank you, Karis. It is wonderful to go on for a long time on this conversation because they are at the core of things. First of all, I think that your conception of dignity is a great advance course precisely in these lines, because I think that it moves from the abyssal thinking to the post-abyssal thinking. That is to say, it's an attempt for a post-abyssality. And from my point of view, it is post-abyssality is like truth in science and epistemology. Today in epistemological studies, you study that truth is not a key concept for science. What is the key concept is the search for truth. Not truth, because truth is always changing all the time. So it's the same. The post-abyssality is something ideal for which we have to struggle. We have to struggle as a sense, is to engage in struggles that are anti-capitalist, anti-colonialist, and anti-patriarchal. And sometimes it is possible when the struggles are strong. For instance, when George Floyd died, we could see that the first stage of that struggle was an anti-colonial struggle, anti-racism, of course. But then as it increased, feminists joined in. trade unions, parties, Bernie Sanders revolution, all joined in. That is to say, the anti-capitalist movements and the anti-sexist movements joined in. I saw at that point a kind of a convergence. And for a while, I think that convergence was very important to bring down Trump. But, you know, in the United States, everything is very limited between Biden and Trump, but that's the option for them. So I think that's absolutely right. I think, and the reason of the asymmetry is precisely because there is an abyssal line. But there was one question here, I think it was your question, that I found very fascinating, because it's, I think when we deal with the immigrants, I think it was Fortini also, one of you, raised the question of the immigrants, which is very important for us here also, is that, you know, in my most recent book, my recent work, I'm trying to see whether I should go on with the concept of the abyssal line, or if we should consider the abyssal zone. That is to say, a thickness of the zone. Why they say this is a zone, because there are some people that are already integrated or are in the process of being integrated in the metropolitan sociability, as you know from my reading, from my conception, and but they are in between. In that, and if some crisis come, they are expelled to the colonial, to the other side of the line, to the colonial subhumanity. My research in this case was on the elderly people in Europe, the elderly. The elderly in Europe were the age group that was most victimized, fatally victimized. The mortality rates for elderly are much higher. And it's not just because they are more vulnerable. It's because the way we take care of elderly in our societies is to put them in deposits. And these deposits have nothing to do with health care for them. It's just depositing. Let them die there. So these deposits, in a period of crisis, showed that the elderly people were people on the fringe. They could be expelled to the colonial. And I came to this when I saw, and then went through the data, when I saw the military people in Madrid, coming to Madrid, to discover 800 dead bodies there. 800 people that have died. Nobody cared about them. You know, so they, in a deep crisis, they are expelled. We do the same with immigrants. When Europe needed them for something, they were the Gastarbeiters, right? But now we are erecting mowers and walls and fences and things like that. How much experience we are wasting by doing this? So the final question, I'm sorry for 2 minutes.
Sorry,
the question of heterogeneity.
Can we add a last question also from Penny Travlou, because we have very limited time in our disposition, and to give your answer in total. So Penny's question is about Boaventura and cosmopolitics.
Dear Boa, I wanted to ask you, I'm going back to the introduction of your book, The Epistemologies of the South, and what is intriguing is that you have two manifestos put together, the one on Boaventura and the other one calling about the intellectual activists. And you say that you call for resistance to Tina and the trio of the world north, of the global north, capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy, and the vision of the possibilities for an alternative world. Following your two manifestos, I would like to ask you a very short but open to reflection question on methodology when we talk about alternative worlds and a good life, Boaventura. So what are the methodological tools we can use as intellectual activists to decolonize our research, resist against Tina, and offer us novel ways to envision an alternative world? Post-pandemic. Thank you.
Oh, it is. This is the key question, the millions question at the end of our conversation. This is a fabulous question. To Michalis, I just say, Michalis, I can answer you the question of heterogeneous knowledge demarcation or not by mail. If you send me an email, I can get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll be glad in other questions that are not answered. I'll be glad
okay,
to
of course,
do that
yes.
by mail. No? Here is, this is a fabulous, wonderful question. It is the reason why I put the manifestos there is precisely to show a kind of a desperate disquietude on my part. But what we can do, particularly if you look at university or if you are at university. And I think that's why I say, and I remember you, I'm sure that you remember that when I say, well, and it's true today, even with the Zoom world in which we live, that I spend 50% of my time with university, people like here, and 50% with social movements that are also resorting to Zoom, and we discuss all kinds of things also, particularly the social movements are in a period of very difficult situation because social movements are about presence, co-presence, and how to revive co-presence after all this. I mean, there is all these traumatic type of things that are going on, mental health problems, desperation, giving up, resignation, and so on. So I think it's very important to focus on methodologies. And I think that the idea of a good life, which of course comes from summa causae, the catch-all word for, buen vivir, good living, which is not living good in the sense of accumulation of consumer, but living in harmony with others and with nature. Because as you know, I've been saying that all the time, 75% of our biodiversity is in indigenous territories. So they have been guardians and they have been laboring the forest. Yesterday, I was in a live transmission with a great Brazilian leader in the Amazonian region. He was explaining how the Amazonia is fully populated. This idea of a rainforest without people is a myth of the West. There are lots of people working there, but they are guardians of the forest. They don't destroy the forest. So I think that the good life is basic an idea of reconceptualizing also culture, nature. It's conceptualizing this idea that there should be no private property on what we call nature. I mean, this was Rousseau in a sense, but much before Rousseau, it was theorized already by people in India and in China. It is the idea that is really ridiculous because, as Karl Polanyi also told us, it's not a commodity because it's not, land or labor are not produced in the market, and therefore they are not commodities. They are imperfect commodities or whatever. You know that discussion. What I think is that that's why I was insisting on the methodologies. How you see our methodologies are driving us to create objects by separating subject, the researcher, and the object of the research. So the researcher has the knowledge, and the object, at the most, has information, not knowledge, when you are interviewing something. But if you move to the epistemology of the South, from knowledge about to knowledge with, then we are not relying on subject-object. In fact, we are wanting to create subjectivities on the other side, contribute to subject-subject interactions. How we do collaborative methodologies. So you know that in the end of Cognitive Empire, I explained that, and some later on we can have a full discussion. I have one, if you want to follow up next week in Seville. We are organizing an epistemology of the South seminar on methodologies. And if you read the chapter 6, 8, and 7 of the end of the Cognitive Empire, the reason why I dedicate those chapters to the methodologies is because it's really very important. It is very important for us because how we work with some people. So we have to immediately have a different view of what counts as rigorous knowledge. Is rigorous knowledge always the written knowledge or the oral knowledge? So you know that following my Ugandan colleague, I use the concept of orature, versus literature, because it's not oral literature, it's orature. It has a different logic. So we have to develop a different logic of interaction with orature. Second, you have to demonumentalize knowledge, written knowledge. How you do that? You are familiar with Alice, my project. Go to that project, the webpage, which is alive, and we are converting the project into a program. And we have there my 12 world conversations with people. And the reason why I talk with Mudimbe, with many other big scholars, Mogobe Ramos in South Africa, was to show to the students and everyone that when someone leaves the text, as I'm living here, I'm not reading anything, we are more messy in our formulation. We repeat ourselves. We do demonumentalize. We show all the contradictions in our knowledge. As you go to the interviews, the conversations, you can see that. So you have to demonumentalize the rigorous, so-called rigorous written knowledge. Then we have to go to a deep experience of the senses, because you are taught to see, to hear, but we don't see the invisible. If you are doing an interview with an immigrant and you just see the visible, what he is saying or she is saying, you are not getting it. Most of what he thinks about his ancestors, for instance, are invisible to you. His trajectories, her trajectories, they're hiding from you. So you have to have a strategy of trust. It's not a methodological trust. It's a trust. Trust is something else. It's not a technology. Is that trust is something that develops when people think and come to know that you are on the same side of their struggle. If you are doing interview with immigrants and they finally, by your action, by your work that we have been doing, those concentration camps that we don't like to call them, but that's what they are. If we go through them and you struggle for their dignity in the camps, they trust you. When they trust you, they tell you stories that they won't tell the stories to the researchers from the European Union that come there with the written report, questionnaire, and so on. Is that tell you lies. They tell you fabricated lies about themselves. We know that. But they have to do that to defend themselves. But if you develop a trust relationship, then you have to listen, not to hear, but to listen to. And when you listen, Iris, you have to listen to things that you never thought would be relevant for your research, because you are really very concerned about your research issues, but those people are concerned about something else. A friend that they left in Bangladesh, someone that is about to give birth, things like that, and they want to tell you the story. And you have a limited time for your interview because, you know, the research project tells you that you have to move on. Our research is really live research in many respects. So if you go back to those chapters, Iris, you can later on have a discussion. It is really a learning process for ourselves. We have to unlearn a lot before we can learn. Thank you.
We learned so much from you. Thank you, dear professor. So, Iris.
We have to conclude, unfortunately, due to the lack of time. So I am to conclude in a way. And we wanted to thank you deeply for this wonderful discussion with us. And we hope that we will be able very soon to continue this discussion that seems to be very fundamental for the whole project and for many things that are being developed right now in the country. So I would like to make just a very small phrase that I think is one of the most important contributions of epistemologies of the South and has to do with this idea of rearguard theory. I think that it is a theory, epistemologies of the South, that aspires to be a rearguard theory, not an avant-garde theory, where all types of knowledges, traditional and scientific, are perceived as intertwined paradigms of equal validity that can be used to make life worth living. So in that line, I would pose a question, rather a rhetoric question. How important could a renewed decolonial perspective be for a new progressive political project? Let's hope that we can continue this discussion anew in the next meeting of ours from that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.